record. And we can just open it up, and you all are welcome to jump in with any questions on any topics, any of the previous technical assistant session topics you'd like to ask about as well.
I can start. Do we wait for you to call on us or just
You can
ask a
unmute.
question?
No, you can unmute, and if we have two people that unmute at the same time, we'll flip a coin.
Okay. So I'll put on my video for this
Sure.
question.
Sure.
I'm Suzanne. Oops, my hair's. I'm Suzanne Didier from National Capital Treatment and Recovery, and I'm sorry, my Zoom says board. I don't know why. I'll have to fix that. My question is, in the budgets, can we include administrative overhead? And if so, how much can we include? Is there a maximum?
So we did create a template. I have to go back and look. I don't think we put a specific cap, because we did also allow folks to apply for general operating grants overall. So yes, I think that's a great question. I don't believe, but Amber and Elizabeth, please correct me if there's a cap from Arlington County that they only permit a certain level of indirect to be included in the budget.
Nope, I believe that's correct.
Okay. Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
The template doesn't specifically say administrative overhead. There's just a line for other. Excuse me. Could I put it in there?
Yes, you could put indirect in there and just tell us what percentage or your calculation for the indirect.
Okay. We have a federally approved rate. Can we include documentation that shows that, or?
So I would go ahead and just write that as part of your narrative. And if we need the documentation as follow-up further in the process, we'll request it, but you don't have to submit it. Unless Amber and Elizabeth, do you guys feel differently? Do you need it with the application up front, or would you rather just get it on the back end during the approval process?
I'm okay with getting it during the approval process.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's all.
Hi, Jackie.
Hi. I have a question about questions 8 and 9. They are the partnership questions. We are an organization that has long-standing partnerships with the other organizations that we work with, Arlington County Public Schools and stuff like that. And the questions are a little, I'm looking for like some clarity as to what exactly you're looking for from each of those. And then, like if we're not seeking new partnerships, but we have an existing partnerships, for example, with Arlington County Public Schools, and we detail that in question 8, what are we then putting in question 9? So I'm just looking for some differentiation or a little bit of clarity on those two questions.
Yeah, so if you look at the rubric and you try to write if you try to write to 3, that would be your best way to kind of address that. And if you really feel like you're 3 is maybe not going to work and you need to kind of write to 2, I would really look to kind of explain the descriptors there about how those partnerships are impacting your work. What like why they're important, if there is any other partners beyond those partners that you'd like to pursue to add more to the work, or that you think that deepening that partnership will enhance your work, talking through some of those pieces, and really, again, just using that rubric, that section, again, I say start with section 3 and just really try to write what's in those check boxes to address those 2 questions in particular.
No, and that's what I'm trying to do with every single question, like just going straight down that list, because 1, 2 are all lumped into 3, and focusing on that green box. So would 1 more be a description of how you work with the organization, and then, or would 8 be that, and then 9 is more the impact with the organization? Or, I mean, it's if you're talking about, you're almost using the same information in both of them, or saying the same thing in both of them.
If I can, thanks, Steph. The way that this was worded was around the idea that one of the major pieces that came out of this process of engaging community and partnership was about the idea that it takes a village approach, right? So we understand that longstanding partnerships are going to be an integral part of being able to accomplish any of these particular proposals, but also that they may be in different stages of development, and also in sort of in a way of encouraging those nonprofits that may be smaller to seek out larger partnerships, partnerships with larger organizations. And so we really created these two questions in order to be able to allow that space. But if you, in your narrative, that you want to be able to say, hey, look, here's how our network is established, this is how we approach the work, and this is what our intentions are about any new partners who may emerge about that, then that's fine. That all works within that. So don't feel like, in essence, the questions are phrased in such a way that you're able to tell your story, right? And so don't worry. What the wording of it was to open it up as expansively as possible to those organizations who haven't seen themselves represented in the questions before.
Okay, and I did do. I saw that there is a new NOFA, an updated NOFA that changed some of the wording from last week to this week on that partnership question, because I do remember one of the presenters saying, I'm seeing a lot of confused faces when we talked about that question.
There was, because it said more about your program and not
Organization.
partnership. And so we wanted to
Yeah.
make the distinction that we wanted to understand how the partnership was
Yeah.
impacting your work.
That was a game changer, I will say.
Okay, good. Well, I hope that was helpful. And we're sorry for the confusion that the original part of the rubric may have caused. And I think, again, to Scott's point, 8 is really asking, like, who do you partner with and kind of why? And then 9 is asking a little bit to go a little bit deeper in that, like, is this a new or existing partnership? I think if you look at the rubric, it asks, like, discussing how long that partnership's been in existence, why it's specifically beneficial, any relevant timelines to how long you've been in partnership or strategies to that partnership, and then, your plans for sustainability. So as you said, these are long-standing partners. So beyond this proposal, like talking about the sustainability. So making some of those distinctions, and again, using those check boxes that kind of ask that, I think will help sort of make a little bit of a distinguishing point between the two.
All right, we'll give it a go.
Yeah. Okay. No, but great question, Jackie. Thank you. Hi, Nancy. Just saw you come on camera. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
May I ask a question?
Of course.
Okay, so my apologies that this has been addressed before, but I'm curious as I read through the rubric and read through our proposals and all. But my question relates to how the reviewers and/or the county will prioritize in terms of the need for these projects. I mean, to be extreme, if everybody fills out the rubric and everybody's great, and one person is raising money for toothbrushes for cats, and one is raising money to save babies from being homeless. It's like, how can you tell that from a scoring on the rubric? What might be more important to the community? And is there a way, even, I know that you're using community members to score, but I don't see that being asked in the questions. And I'm just curious about how those decisions will ultimately be made.
So I'll start and definitely have Amber and Elizabeth jump in. But the idea, Nancy, was that those questions are being asked in the first few sections around what is the case, what is the need, what would be the impact and the gap in the community if this program did not exist, and how would that impact the community. So those are scored, and there is questions around, like, what data or anecdotal data, like how are you establishing this need. The community did not preset needs that needed to be addressed, because we know that the organizations that are serving these communities are the experts, and the communities themselves are the experts in what the communities need. So there are questions that distinctly kind of speak to that need and why it's so important and where there is a gap. And so how that is really addressed in the proposal, it will be scored via the rubric, and making an adamant case for why this is necessary and what that gap would sort of be.
And I appreciate that. And I saw those pieces, but when you look at the rubric on how those are scored, it's more like, did they answer the question? And so you see that somebody can get a high score just because they said that this need was great, as opposed to convincing the reviewer of, I see this need as very great, or I see this need as not so important. And so I couldn't really tell how that's going to come out and how those, how the reviewers are able to sort of decide what they think the priorities should be in the communities.
And
Yes,
that will be, I would think, be part of the discussion in the consensus sessions, where folks are talking through like the level of need, what was discussed in the proposals as the level of need, the impact it would have on the community if this program did not exist, and the gap that would exist, and how that would have an impact on those community residents. But again, I'll certainly let the Arlington team speak a bit more to that, but we didn't want to be prescriptive in telling folks like, you have to work on this particular need or that particular need, because we know there's probably needs that, the community is much more in tune with and would know that that's really urgent and dire and would be able to express that in their application. But again,
okay, so there'll be discussion that with some consensus building on the team outside of did they answer the question piece?
Right. So ideally the panel will come together for the consensus session where everyone will have individually scored. They'll decide on final scores and they'll decide on funding recommendations. So there'll be discussions throughout regarding the merits of each proposal, how they scored, and the recommendations for their funding. But again, I will certainly defer to the Arlington team too in case I missed anything.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy.
And I'll echo the piece about being able to demonstrate that need, and really speaking to any data or whether that be qualitative or quantitative that supports the need that you are trying to address. So really making sure that you are able to make the case for why there is a need, as opposed to us just saying, oh, we're going to prioritize this over that. But how are you really able to demonstrate that that is what the community needs? And like Stephanie said, there will be a consensus session between the reviewers for them to discuss that as well.
Thank you.
Hi, Sherry. Oh, you're muted.
Too many things.
That's okay.
I sent a question to the NOFA folks over the weekend and today, and I didn't receive a response, but I'll ask the questions here.
Sure.
One, the logic model that I've tried to download from NOFA's and from the website is different than the logic model that we were trained in. That's my first problem.
Okay.
Maybe I'm trying to download from the wrong place, but it would seem to me that the website it shouldn't matter where you click on the website, but specifically the impact and goals, the last column looks like it might be the first column in the one that's on the website. If you take a look at it right now. Or maybe I selected it. I don't know, but it seems to me that anyone should be able to select the link from the website and get the same logic model that you're asking us to complete. So I tried different places to look. And then the second one was another template, the budget template. It says in the NOFA there's a sample, but there is no sample in the template I downloaded. And then the sample in the technical assistance thing has more than one position under the personnel piece, but then you can't add a line to add the other position.
Okay, sorry, I'm going into the application section and trying to download them now.
Well, if you just select the one that's right there on the website.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. And then it goes to downloads. So let me go into the fillable budget template.
So when I try to, just typically you just select add a line and then a line appears, but it's locked for any kind of situation. So the way I was going to go around it was I was just going to say personnel and put the number of FTEs and explain it in the narrative. But your example for how to do the budget is different than the template will allow me to do. So again,
no, we should unlock it. I don't know why that's locked, but yeah, you can't, for some reason, you can't insert another row. We should be able to unlock that because it was initially, it's just a fillable PDF. So let me see.
Fillable Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah. Unlock
And then has someone been able to look at the logic model?
fillable budget.
So I don't know if others have had trouble with that, but and then the other is a logic model sample
Okay.
or template.
Yeah, let me grab that.
And Stephanie, I believe we did get a question maybe a week ago to the inbox about the logic model. Maybe the columns are not lined up the way that
No, it has a total different first column that's called goals. So it's not, it's a different, it's not the same template.
I think in the logic model it's switched, like it's switched between goals at the beginning and goals at the end.
But then it should say goals impact, and the example should have been the same, because goals impact are different than just goals. So I just got very confused because I thought, well,
Okay, team, we can work to address the budget being more, the Excel sheet being more fillable and unlocking that so you can add additional rows. And then we can address the titles on the top of the logic model so that it matches the sample. Okay.
so it's clear that, I mean, this is just not only for me, but if I were trying to do this on Wednesday night, I would be really having a hard time. So that the first column is the same as the last column in the examples provided or something like that.
Okay.
I will say for the budget, and I've had this question from someone else too, for the budget, I would say all of this position should be in the one line, just distinguish the different positions. So you can put multiple FTEs in the salary line. You don't need a separate individual line for each FTE, if I'm understanding your question correctly.
So Elizabeth, are you saying to do Alt Enter in that so that it's like you could say 1 FTE program director, 0.5 FTE program manager, and just do Alt Enter and then put their salaries that way?
Yeah, or you could even just do, I would think in the narrative column, you could just break it apart and then have your total in the total column. And then just in the narrative, just write out what is going on.
The problem with both the logic model template and the budget model template, though, is that because it's a cell, you can't enter to make spaces between. So you have to just, I had for the activities in my logic model, I just had to run all the activities together because I couldn't, you can't put space between, you can't select where you return on an Excel cell.
That's what she's talking about with the alt enter. That's what she was talking about. Because I had that issue as well. And I learned that if you hit alt enter, you can actually create a space between the different items in one cell.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Sure.
Somebody's talking, but they're muted.
Stephanie, you're muted with what you just said.
I was just agreeing with who was just speaking, which was like when you do Alt Enter, it'll just give you a line underneath in the same cell, and it'll just keep going down each time you hit Alt Enter.
So you have to hold down Alt and Enter at the same time?
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. No, great question, and thank you for asking. And yeah, we'll look at both and see if there's ways we can address that. But it to Elizabeth's point, in both Alt Enter should work, so you should be able to fill down in a box by just Alt Entering within that box, and the box will expand down. And even if we can't see it, we can draw the line down and pull it out. So if you're having any trouble with that, just let us know. But Alt Enter should work. And we'll go back and address the headers on the logic model and re-upload that to the application site. Kathy, I see that you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I had a question about the logic model as well. So I understand about the SMART goals, and typically the way, that I've been trained on SMART goals is that they have to be measurable, time limited. And I noticed in the sample, the way that it's done is there's not like one statement that says, by June of 2024, 14 people will have completed the training or whatever. The way that it's done is that the numbers are in outputs. And then under impacts and goals, it's more general impacts and goals. So is that the way you'd like us to do it as well? Because I didn't see really a space to write out an official SMART goal. But okay.
All right. Hi.
Hi.
Overall, yeah, and I hear what you're saying. I think that everyone's got their own home recipe to a good logic model, right? So I hear where you're coming from. The overall program goal is really where you're going to deliver the overall, that one at the top of the logic model. Which is that's the one, the program objective, right? The program objective is exactly where you want to land that SMART goal. The way that you're describing it, that's your overarching, if you do this, then this will happen, right? And this is how many people are going to be benefiting from that. That's where you want to land that. As far as as far as the way that we structured it with outputs, outcomes, and impact goal, we really were intentional about segmenting it out to show that here is what the direct result or output of the activities are. From that output, if this output is achieved, then this particular impact is achievable. And then the impact and goal as they are stated here, and that's why we left it kind of impact/goal, was an interpretation of the idea of the societal benefit that will come from your program filling addressing that need, that identified need that you have. And that you can draw a line almost from the direct output through to that particular impact. We didn't want to be more prescriptive than that because there are so many interpretive ways that folks are trying to design their programs, right? So the idea is that by participating in, say, an arts or dance program, that it will have this particular impact on a societal need that's more human services oriented. We didn't want to try to box people in by the way that we were prescribing it. So you're right that there is a way to do it that's a lot more, that can be more detailed and granular, but we really wanted to just make sure that folks had a good understanding of how to design a logic model from sort of left to right in terms of deciding from resources out through to impact, and making sure that that was scaffolded in an appropriate way. But I appreciate you bringing that to the foreground. We went a couple rounds on deciding how best to approach it. So totally noted, and will be integrated into future training sessions.
Okay, thank you so much. That's really helpful.
Can I ask a follow-up to that then?
Sure, of course.
Okay, so then what then is the difference between the outcome? I know the difference between outputs and outcomes. But between the outcome and the impact, they're then almost the same, the way that you're putting it. Like I took it as the goals, because typically when I've worked on logic models, it always starts with the goals. You set the goal and then you put the inputs and the outputs and the outcomes and you go like that. This having the impact and the goal at the end is very different. And
so I don't want to disagree with you, and absolutely I wouldn't disagree with you, because the way that you were trained was totally valid and legit and a very good way of proposing a logic model, right? And the thing is that let me just emphasize the first part of the word of this item is that it's the logic. If the logic is there in terms of how you structure it, then it will be interpreted as such, right? To answer your question, it's about the oscillations. It's about the outward impact that happens, that you go from the outputs, which is your direct impact, to the short-term outcomes, to the longer term or wider term of impact that you have within the community. So as to say that my output will affect 100 children, those 100 children will go home and have a better experience with their family, or become more aware and cognizant of their interactions with society. And as such, the local community institutions will benefit from more volunteers and participation from the next generation. That's just one example of how you would start from the center, moving your way out, is one way of structuring, one of many very valid and legitimate ways of structuring from outputs to outcomes to impact. So I hope that that gives you some indication that yours is not a wrong way to go about it. And if it's logical and has a way of building out from left to right, then it will be interpreted as such.
Okay. Yeah, and I apologize. I did not go through the session on logic models because I wasn't working on them, but we're working on it now. So.
That's it. No, and by all means, please do review. I have the short session up on the website, I believe, that you can review. It is a very short session, but again, the NOFA inbox is open and ready for any questions that come through around logic models. We'll do our best to answer them. I don't want to prescribe any one way of doing it right, because the way I've been trained is that there's many ways to do it right. So I think that the way we just try to do it was to make it as accessible to many people as possible. And I hope that in your interpretation of it, you'll be able to fit your training or your way of approaching it in there as well. Because if it's logical, it should pass. It'll be fine.
Mostly want to do it to meet the scoring rubric at this point.
Indeed, that would be helpful. Thank
really
you.
the goal at this point in time.
Margot, did I see your hand up? Yes.
Yeah, and I can bow to Sherry if Sherry's is a follow-up to this, but so Sherry, jump in if you're still interested in the logic model question. I'm curious about the level of detail you are looking for in number 7 around staffing responsibilities. Organizational staff descriptions. Do you want, like, here's what they do in a typical week, or is this more of a overview of the position?
Sorry, I lost my cursor for a second. I was like, I'm trying to mute myself. Okay. So, I mean, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I am going to say utilizing the rubric and the way, specifically what the rubric's asking around the staffing. So again, detailing, clearly, like, what are the staffs, and let me go back, because are you looking in section 3 or are you in section, sorry, I have like the rubric open.
In the other details.
In the other details. So other details. I'm just trying to get to the rubric so I can look at are you in section 7, the final piece?
Sorry, I heard question 7. Is that correct?
Oh,
Question 7.
I'm sorry.
Question 7. So that's section 3, question 7. So you were in the right
7.
spot.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, I was confused too for a second. I'm sorry.
I heard section 7. I'm sorry. So describes in detail staff qualifications, expertise, and experience. So again, I provided like a sample, and it's up on the website, like a sample response that we scored. And if you look, there was kind of really broad descriptions of the staff, like 25 years experience, XYZ. So I think as long as you give a level of detail that covers, again, their level of experience and their expertise, and we know that space is limited, so you might have to be a little briefer than you'd like, not being able to give their full resume, but just really talking about their qualifications, their expertise and experience. So that might be number of years, type of education, maybe it's a certain certification, depending on what you're talking about that they're doing for your particular program. So we know there's probably going to be a little bit of a need of brevity and being concise, but just really giving as much as you can within a few sentences, probably the breadth and depth of what that person is providing to that program and why they're, essential.
And then related to question number 22, it's that very small grid. Mm-hmm. This is essentially a smaller version of that same answer.
22, sorry, just contrary to popular belief, I don't have the questions memorized. I should.
Section 7, question number 20.
Yeah, no, thank you. So yeah, that chart is a little bit more, and there is a sample of that chart, response to that chart in the NOFA, but that's like a table really talking about a little more directly, like individuals' relationship to the program or project. So this might include beyond just the program staff. This might be like you have a board member, as you can see in the sample in appendices.
Appendix 4.
in appendix 4, like they listed the executive director and that they're the founder of the organization. There's an accountant that has 30 years in nonprofit. So this could be a little bit, you know, it's another version. It might be the same folks you're talking about in that narrative. It might be that those folks plus some other, you know, individuals that maybe are not involved in the day-to-day, but are maybe a board member or more like part of your indirect staff that make that work go. Am I explaining? And Elizabeth, Amber, Samia, am I capturing the distinction between those two correctly? Okay.
Great, thank you.
No, great question. Thank you. Sherry?
This is a follow-up to Margot's question, and then I have a different question. So just, it says, describe in detail staff qualifications, expertise, and experience. Are those for the staff that funding is being requested for? Or is that for everybody that has something to do with this? Because I'm not, our accountant, for instance, in the example, the accountant is one of them. Our accountant is our accountant. She can do that, but we're not really talking about her activities. That's just part of the organization. So do you see what I mean? So you're not talking about everybody, including the board member who happens to have some expertise that might help provide advice.
I would say those would go in the chart, right? The accountant would in the chart. I think the descriptors in the other question, in question 7, would be more about impacting the actual sort of day-to-day work, or the day-to-day programming or day-to-day project. So a little bit more of like who's having the impact directly with the community members. I want to look to the Arlington County team. Is that the distinction that we wanted to make here? Was, again, the chart was more to your point, like that bigger impact of indirect work that it still needs to make everything go, like the accountant, or like the board member who's bringing some content area expertise to oversight of the org. But I think the descriptors are more directly like the folks that are kind of in that day-to-day impacting the community with whatever they're doing for the org. Does that help, Sherry? Did that just make that distinction?
Yeah, that is very, very, very helpful.
Okay.
But the other thing, I want to go back to Jackie's question that's in the chat and the answer. So when I looked at who is burdened, you're talking about who is burdened because who is burdened in the community and why by what's going on now. Not when you do a self-evaluation, you usually are doing a self-evaluation is who is burdened or how are people burdened because we can't do X, Y, and Z. And then in terms of and who's missing, it's like this is who we're serving now with X, Y, and Z. We could serve this group. So when you said by a decision, program, policy, etc., that means by a decision, program, policy, limitation of what you're able to do or whatever for yourselves, correct? Because that's what that rubric is for. It's for you to evaluate yourself, not.
So it could be a both and. That's a good question. So let's say you are with an organization that is doing food distribution on Tuesdays from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. Who's burdened might be those who
don't have transportation, are working during the day, etc.
They could also be who's missing, right? Those folks who don't have childcare, things like that. So it could be self-limitations, right? Maybe the burden is that you don't have the staff to be able to work hours outside of what's been provided. So just going through the exercise of thinking about who is burdened in that process and naming those things. Similarly with who's missing, right? And so it could be, like you said, it could be something that you think about from an organizational standpoint and something that you think about from a community standpoint.
Okay, thanks. Because I had answered a different question. Then I looked at this, I go, oh, I did that wrong. Okay, thanks.
I'm glad that was helpful.
Feel free to jump in with questions by unmuting, or if you'd like to type something in the chat, that's welcome as well.
This is Sherry again, since it's so quiet. What about qualitative and qualitative information? I assume that both is better, but are things downgraded if there's not quantitative, or qualitative, or qualitative is fine? So if for someone who only has qualitative, they're not going to say, well, I didn't see numbers on the quantitative.
Sherry, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. That is completely against the antithesis of, that is completely against the spirit of this NOFA altogether. Is really about your narrative, the story you're bringing about the services you're going to bring to the community and how it's filling that community need, and however you're sort of presenting it is going to be brought in its in considering holistically. So we welcome qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods, interpretive dance, if that's the way you're going, but I'm sorry, I'm just making a joke.
Okay, mine's going to be interpretive dance, but then in terms of the outputs in the logic model.
Sure, understood. As far as the qualitative goes, the idea is it won't be a matter of volume, right? That you're able to put down a number of thousands or whatever, but there is a proportion to the resources that you bring to the program versus the amount of service it's going to be, and that will be proportionally weighed against the amount that you're asking for. So the idea is that if you're asking for a set amount over a set amount period of time, or even particularly renewable, that will be weighed against what is brought as what are the resources going to be that this money will be paying for, as well as the output in terms of who will be served and how many of them will be served as a result of that as well. If you're able to leverage your qualitative to give that particular narrative and present that particular argument, then it will be logical and will definitely pass the logic model test.
And Sherry, I would just add again in the rubric too, we were really clear in making sure we wrote that to get a 3, it includes one or more relevant data points, story, and or detail to address the need in the proposal. So again, that and or, so it wasn't that it had to be both. It could be and, or it could be or. So that again, it didn't take away from if it was data or a relevant story or a level of detail. It could be any of those.
Yeah, I really, really liked that and appreciated it. And I thought I went for some of the qualitative things, but then I thought, someone's like, I have to find numbers too. But on some of them I do, but some of them I don't. So, okay, thanks.
And there might not be numbers, right? Especially sometimes if this is a need that has not yet been addressed, there might not be actual existing data that you can pull from. There might not be a data set, and we recognize that too. So this might be more qualitative, and that these are like what the community members are telling you. This is what you've seen in focus groups. This is what you've heard from feedback or survey reports. And so we do recognize, again, some needs haven't been unmet for a while, and so there might not be a data set to compare it to.
And yeah, just as a follow-up to that, is forecasting. If you're going to forecast, then just show your math. If you're going to say, hey, look, this is a new need that's going to be addressed. Here's the population that we're going to be serving. Here's what we anticipate is going to happen. It could be a little bit more. It could be a little bit less. That's fine. As long as you show your math as to how you got there, then that should be largely sufficient. Hi, Mario.
Yeah, hi. Related, some of our data has come directly from a conversation with local school district, and looking at how people age out of school and what their transition is like. And so can we just write, this is what we understand from the community service board level. It's projecting into the next 3 to 5 years. Is that helpful? Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now that you put it that way, the only thing I would do, because of course you have a page limit and you don't want to try to stretch yourself too far as into what you're trying to do. So whatever can be positioned as close to the actual action that's happening, right? Because that's where the only hesitation I have is that someone who might be reviewing it or might be considering it down the line might be like, how could you possibly see 3 years or 5 years into the future? If you can keep it as close to the immediate time period as possible and say this is where that trajectory will head, then that would probably hold up. Just had to do something similar, so that's where, yeah.
Hi, Kathy.
Thanks. That just made me think of a question, which is, I know that we can apply for up to 3 years of funding, but given that, you know, we do have page limitations and everything, is it okay to make more of like, you know, a general statement about how the work will continue in years 2 and 3 rather than, you know, going into a huge amount of detail? Or are we mainly applying for year 1 and just giving the budget for year 2 and year 3?
So, and again, please, Arlington County team, feel free to chime in. I think the idea is, I mean, if there's going to be distinctions, like distinct things that are going to change in year 2 and year 3, you'd like to probably highlight those. Like if year 1's a pilot and year 2 is like, you know, a level of execution and year 3 is building off of what you learned in the execution, you'd probably want to at least talk through some of that so that the reviewers get a full picture of what you're aiming to do with those 3 years of funding. If it's the same program year over year for 3 years, I think you can make that distinction pretty early on. But if there's going to be add-ons in upcoming years, maybe just talking about the base programming is similar. And in years 2 and 3, X, Y, and Z, you know, will occur, or we project X, Y, and Z occurring in those years. Because we do recognize, especially if your budget, you know, is 20,000 in year 1, but by year 3, it's 60,000. What's bringing it up? What's changing in the programming? Does that kind of make sense? And again,
yes, no, that's really helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
The quick distinction is that the first question was about population. This was about program. So population and their trajectory is one way of describing it. Program is, as Stephanie pointed out, is the stage of development, what is aiming to be achieved, what will be different. So, you know, privilege the program as much as the population in that respect.
Thanks.
May I also say these are some great questions, some fantastic questions. So thank you so much for coming out and asking them.
Margo, come on back on.
I just want to make sure I have the most up-to-date NOFA and templates. So the ones that are on the website, those are the ones we can be using.
Yes, but we are, per tonight, going to update the logic model to make sure that it matches the sample so that the columns are in the correct order. But everything that's on the website should be the most recent and up-to-date version, including the NOFA with the updated rubric. Am I saying that right, team? Okay, just making sure.
Yeah, and the logic model template that's on the actual application page is the most recent one that reflects the one in the, I think it's just the one on the home page, which thank you, Sherry, for flagging that for us. But what the one that's in the NOFA itself and the one that's on the upload portal page are the correct ones. And yes, I'll definitely bring that up right now so you can see which one it is. I got the right window open. There we go.
And Scott, when you show it, do you want to do just a quick Alt Enter to show folks how it'll populate in a box?
I think I've just been preparing for this moment in my career, to be honest.
know.
All right, here we go, guys. You know that you're in the right industry when if people are asking you for an Excel trick. Okay, here we go. So as you can see from the NOFA point, resources, inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts goals. Impacts goals is over at the right. As I mentioned earlier, program objective is your overall SMART statement. Impacts and goals being a larger, wider impact from the outcomes, which is directly related back to the outputs. Once you're in the text box, you can do it here. You can also do it in the text box here. By holding Alt Enter, it'll bring the cursor down to the next line in which you can enter additional information. Alt Enter, more information can go here. Right. Thank you, Sherry. I've peaked. All right.
Tell me about the program objective or the SMART goal up on top though on this, because
Sure.
I wasn't able to attend that one. I just watched the video.
No, that's okay.
Where is the measurable piece on that? The measurable part.
Yeah, the measurable part of it, and Sherry, this kind of lends itself well to what you were mentioning about qualitative, is that essentially the logic model really wants to point out three things. Who are you serving? Who, and by extension, who's doing the serving? What are you trying to achieve? And how will you do it? So those three elements, those three components should be captured in a sort of mission statement-like statement at the top, which is your overarching objective. You should be able to capture all the elements of what you're trying to do in a very succinct way that then is expanded in detail through the logic model. So here, providing school district students and their families is the who will be served. A trauma informed care program that aims to prevent and reduce the effects of adverse childhood experiences. You have the how and the what here. You have how it's going to be done and what it is trying to achieve, all in one sentence. So that's what you're trying to do. If it requires two sentences, it won't be marked adversely, because ultimately all you're trying to do is convey what is the overall objective in a succinct way, where you get the who, the how, and the what.
But that's different than SMART.
Agreed. Now the thing is that
so that's where that's why I was looking at, well, where's the measurable part of that?
Right. Yeah. No, the thing is that yes, and you're absolutely right that you don't have by June of 24 that you're able to serve 100 children, 100 families with those. That will be expounded upon in the SMART statements below. What I'm trying to say here is that all of the components in here are measurable and quantifiable. You can identify exactly what are the components that you're trying to achieve, and you have in a very specific way what the relationship between those components are. I hear you in the sense that you don't have the quantifiable numbers or pieces and deadlines and pieces like that, but all the components of this sentence can be measured. Well, more importantly, they can be tracked, which is probably even more important than measurement in some ways.
Yeah, they're in the outputs, but I didn't know if you had to put all those things in the.
I don't think so. I don't think that would be necessary.
But I think, to Scott, to your point, if you did say provide school districts by 2026, like if you had by 2026 at the end of that, that's also not going to be penalized. So if you do have a really clear end date of what your program is trying to achieve through your program objective, and you do want to include it in there, you certainly can. There's nothing precluding you from doing that. But I think, to Scott's point, we also weren't trying to be so prescriptive in saying that you had to include that. I hope that, is that fair? Does that help? Okay.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Of course. Oh, the difference on the application that was updated, Alex, good question. So Alex asked that the update on the logic model of the order of the columns. What is the difference on the application that was updated? So that's to say the NOFA application was updated following our second or third TA session, our third TA session that we had just over a week ago. That basically was a stipulation around the idea of partnerships. The question and the rubric was speaking to the idea of what the partnerships were, but the wording in the rubric was slightly confusing because it spoke to organizations rather than partner organizations. So essentially that was updated to reflect partner organizations. Thank you. Again, thank you for the great questions, really helpful.
Are there any other questions? We will still be taking questions through the NOFA email address if additional questions do arise after tonight. We will be updating the logic model to address the column headers to make that a bit more clear. There are no additional questions. We're happy to give you 30 minutes back into your night. But if you do have additional questions, we're also happy to stay on. Okay, I'm hearing silence and I'm not seeing any hands come up. So I wish you all very happy holidays. Please do not hesitate to reach out on the email if you have any questions. And as we said, this will be posted. We will also get these questions added into the FAQs. But we can post this recording if everyone feels comfortable. I know some of you are on camera, so I don't want you to feel uncomfortable if this is posted, but it can be put up as soon as tomorrow if you'd like. Okay, well, happy holidays, everyone. We will get this posted. Thank you so much for your time tonight and for all of your amazing questions. And we look forward to receiving your proposals.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Sorry, Amber, were you about to say something?
No, I was just telling everyone to have a good night.
Oh, okay. Good night, everybody.